Okay. So we're going to be talking about the age of exploration, and let me go ahead and get started here. It's so weird here, present button, and here we go. So let's talk about the age of exploration, and I'm actually going to turn off one more thing here, turn off my video so I'm not there all the time. All right, so here we go. The age of exploration. And let me just this. All right, so now I can see everyone as we do this here. Okay, so the age of exploration is what we're going to be talking about today. Let me go ahead and get my screen right here. And what we're going to be talking about today is a little bit of European history. So some of the stuff that's going on in Europe at this time, we have to remember that we were Europeans in America for nearly 200 or 300 years prior to the ending or the beginning of the Revolutionary War and the independence away from Britain. But today what we're going to be doing is we are going to be, let's see, so can everybody still hear me just fine? Let's see, okay, good, excellent. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about the age of exploration. Now, the 4 centuries of, here's what we're going to be talking about. Europe's geography, a little bit about early voyages. We're not going to be talking too much about Portugal in the east. You may throw them in there. And then we're also going to be talking about Spain, and then some interior coastal exploration. And remember, if you have any questions as I'm discussing this information, please be sure to type them into the chat, and I will answer them as we go along. Now, we're not going to be talking about later voyages of explorations. Don't worry about this section here, because we're not going to get that far. But we're going to be talking about Spanish, the Portuguese, and coastal explorations, mostly of Spain, a little bit of England. Okay, so here we go. Let me go ahead and go to the next slide here. So the 4 centuries following 1500, when we would see the meteoric rise of Western Europe from a cultural backwater to the first culture to dominate the planet. Now, given Western Europe's tiny size, the question arises, what singled it out as the civilization to rise to global dominance? Now, a century ago, Europeans would attribute their dominance to the moral and religious superiority of European and Christian culture. However, life and history are not quite so simple. Rather, there was a unique combination of forces that converged at the right time and place to make European civilization the culture that would largely define the modern world, especially in terms of its technology and political ideology. Now, on the surface, other civilizations seem more likely to predominate, having larger populations, strongly centralized governments, wealth, and technologies comparable to, if not greater than, Western Europe's. For example, Ming China had a population 2 to 3 times that of all of Western Europe. And when I speak of Western Europe in this sense, I'm mostly speaking of France, England, and Spain and Portugal. Now, traditionally, Chinese technology had been among the most innovative in the world, heavily influencing Europe itself with such inventions as gunpowder, the clock, paper, and even the compass, all of which had its roots in China. China's government was strongly centralized and autocratic, being run by what was probably the best civil service in the world at that time. So once again, we looked at some civilizations in the Americas that seemed to be pretty forward-thinking, educating their populace, etc. And now we're looking east, and we're noticing that outside of Europe, things are the same. Things are actually a little bit better than what's happening in Europe. Now, the other major civilizations in the world, such as the Ottoman Turks, Mughal India, Tokugawa Japan, Muscovite Russia, and the earlier Incan and Aztec empires in the Western Hemisphere, told a similar story of being populous, wealthy, except for Russia, and highly centralized under strong autocratic rulers. Now, in fact, it was Western Europe's lack of autocratic rulers that, such as these and other cultures had, which would be the key to its leaping ahead of the pack. Now, for a while, the absolute rulers outside of Europe tended to exploit and suppress their middle class, and in the process, stifle inventiveness and initiative. The spirit of free enterprise and inventiveness had much more free reign in Western Europe. Now that freedom created a powerful dynamic that allowed Europeans to forge ahead with new ideas, business techniques, and technologies that would shape the modern world. And if freedom was the key to Europe's success, geography was much of its underlying basis. So one of the things, in fact, a book written by a gentleman by the name of Niall Ferguson talks about some killer apps that the West had at the time, not the world, but the West had, that was able to propel it forward. And one of those things that it had was freedom, this idea of freedom, or the idea of property rights and medicine and science. We're going to talk a little bit about geography right now. Now, there were two main geographic features or factors that would help lead to Western Europe's later dominance. First of all, Western Europe was broken up into mountains, forests, and bodies of water. The Alps and the Pyrenees cutting Italy. So here we have the Alps, and here we have the Pyrenees cutting, Italy, Spain, and Portugal off from Northern Europe. The English Channel, which is located right here, cutting England off from the continent, and the Baltic Sea up here in the north. Here's the Baltic Sea, all up here, Baltic Sea, separating Scandinavia from the rest of Europe in the south. Now, this broke Western Europe into a large number of independent states that no one ruler had the power and resources to conquer and hold on to. Second, Western Europe had a wide diversity of climates, resources, and waterways, which promoted a large number of separate economies, but which were linked together for trade by the extensive coastlines and river systems covering the region. Therefore, just as one power could control all of Europe politically, or could not control all politically, no one power could monopolize one vital aspect of its economy. Now, thus Europe was characterized by what we call political and economic pluralism, which also reinforced each other. So there was this separation between politics and the economy, something that we kind of bring over when we come over to the United States, when our ancestors come to the United States from Western Europe, and we kind of decide that, you know, we should have more independence and less government intervention and control the economy, and we have lots of arguments in American history on how much control should the government have. Now, the political and economic pluralism also contributed to promote the rise of a prosperous and innovative middle class. Now, that could create and spread new ideas, business techniques, and technology if the local leaders would allow it. If they did not, there was always the option of moving to another state that did not give them the freedom to pursue their interests. So there was lots of movement around Europe, different peoples, because of its openness and because of the ability to move around. Now, the rise of a free middle class had two other important effects. So the ability to move and the rise of the European middle class. Here's that idea of economic pluralism right here. Now, in conjunction with Western Europe's political pluralism, it could spread new technology and ideas. Second, in conjunction with Western Europe's economic pluralism, the middle class was able to create a freer capitalist economy and promote a competitive spirit that encouraged new technologies and generated profits for those with the drive and imagination to invent and sell them. Now, these two factors combined to generate even more rapid technological development, especially in the realm of military inventions. There were three main areas of military technology. First, there was the new gunpowder technology, which when combined with the Roman drill and march, recently rediscovered and revived during the Renaissance, created the most powerful and efficient armies in the world by the late 1600s. The defensive response to gunpowder gave Europe a second military factor: stronger and more sophisticated fortresses to resist artillery. Now, these fortresses tied invading armies down to prolong and tedious sieges that stopped or at least drastically slowed the progress of invading armies. Now, one side effect of this was that it fed back into further and further reinforced Western Europe's political pluralism. The third military innovation, or more properly application, was the development of of large, bulky ships to withstand long voyages over the rough waters of the Atlantic Ocean. Now, such ships also served as excellent gun platforms, thus making European navies the most deadly on the planet. So the military, the three factors, they converged to help Western Europe establish large overseas colonies and colonial empires, which were conquered by Europe's small but well-armed and disciplined armies and navies and held under control by powerful European fortresses. Now, as time and Western Europe's technology progressed, European armies would show an amazing ability to defeat non-European armies many times their size with astounding regularity, each time increasing and strengthening their hold on their overseas colonies, which is something we see even in the Americas. Now, Europe's large colonial empires brought an influx of money and resources into Europe, which fed back into Europe's economic and political pluralism, especially after 1600, when smaller states such as England and the Dutch Republic were taking their share of overseas trade colonies, thus starting the cycle all over again. Now, these colonial empires also made Western Europe the center of a world economy, providing with the money and resources needed for the Industrial Revolution in the late 1700s. And it's no accident that the Industrial Revolution started in Great Britain, which also happened to be the foremost colonial power of its day. Now, thanks to this cycle, Europe and European-derived cultures, United States, Canada, and Australia, were able to control 85% of the globe by 1900. Since then, Europe has lost its colonial empire, thanks primarily to two highly destructive world wars, but not before it could spread its ideas and technology across the globe where they have taken firm root. Okay, so this is just placing Europe in context and the area that we're going to be talking about, and now we're going to be shifting to some different regions. Okay, are there any questions so far about the rise of Europe and the rise of Western powers? Now, in 1400 AD, Europeans probably knew less of the globe than they had during the Pax Romana, or when the Roman Empire was in control nearly 1,000 years earlier. Outside of Europe and the Mediterranean, little was known, with rumor and imagination filling the gaps. Pictures of bizarre-looking people with umbrella feet, faces in their stomachs, and dogs' heads illustrated books about lands to the east. There was a legendary Christian king named Prester John, with an army of 1 million men and a mirror that would show him any place in the realm whom Christians hoped to ally with against the Muslims. Europeans also had many conceptions about the planet outside their home waters. They had no real concept of the size or the shape of Africa or Asia. Because of a passage in the Bible, they thought the world was 7/8 land and that there was a great southern continent that connected to Africa, making any voyages around Africa to India impossible since the Indian Ocean was an island, or was inland, excuse me. They had no idea at all of the existence of the Americas, Australia, or Antarctica. They also vastly underestimated the size of the Earth by some 5,000 to 10,000 miles. However, such a miscalculation gave explorers like Columbus and Magellan the confidence to undertake voyages to the Far East, since they should be much shorter and easier than they turned out, and they should be much shorter and easier than they actually turned out to be. Now, about this time, European explorers started to lead the way in global exploration, timidly hugging the coast at first, but gradually getting bolder and striking out across the open seas. There were three main factors that led to Europeans opening up of a whole new world at this time. First, the rise of towns and trade, along with the Crusades in the centuries preceding the age of exploration, caused important changes in Europeans' mental outlook that would give them the incentive and confidence to launch voyages of exploration in three ways. First, they stimulated desire for Far Eastern luxuries. Second, they exposed Europeans to new cultures, peoples, and lands. And their interest in the outside world was further stimulated by the travels of Marco Polo in the late 1200s. Finally, towns and the money they generated helped lead to the Renaissance that changed Europeans' view of themselves in the world. There was an increasing emphasis on secular topics, including geography. Skepticism encouraged people to challenge older geographic notions. Humanism and individualism gave captains the confidence in their own individual abilities to dare to cross the oceans in their tiny ships and primitive, their tiny ships and very primitive technologies and navigational instruments. That were at their disposal. Now, medieval religious fervor also played its part. While captains such as Columbus, da Gama, and Magellan had to rely on their own skills as leaders and navigators, they also had an implicit faith in God's will and guidance in their missions. In addition, they felt it was their duty to convert to Christianity any new peoples they met. And once again, we see Renaissance Europe caught up in the transition between the older medieval values and new secular ones. Now, together, they created a dynamic attitude that sent Europeans out on a quest to claim the planet as their own. Now, Europe's geographic position also drove it to find new routes to Asia in three ways. First of all, Europe's geographic position at the extreme, so right here, at the extreme position in western end of trade routes with the East allowed numerous middlemen, each to take his cut and raise the cost of the precious silks and spices before passing them on to still another middleman. So in other words, here's where they would begin, Canton in the East, and as they would travel along these trade routes, they would be bought and sold. It wouldn't be one person traveling all across. They'd be traded, and each time they go, the price would increase just a little bit. So by the time it got all the way from China to Portugal or Spain or France or England, the price was so large that it was difficult for people to purchase the stuff. Now, those trade routes were long, dangerous, and quite fragile. And it would take just some strong hostile power to establish itself along these routes in order to disrupt the flow of trade or raise the prices exorbitantly. For Europeans, that power was the Ottoman Empire, located down here. The fall of the Byzantine Empire and the earlier fall of the Crusader states had given the Muslims a larger share of the trade headed for Europe. Thus, Europe's disadvantageous geographic position provided an incentive to find another way to the Far East. So that they asked themselves, if we're having trouble, if the prices are going so high traveling this way, maybe there's another way to get there so we don't have to trade with everyone. However, Europe was also in a good position for discovering new routes to Asia. It was certainly in as good a position as the Muslim Emirates on the coast of North Africa for exploring the Atlantic coast of Africa. And when Spain gained control of both sides of the Straits of Gibraltar, so here's the Strait of Gibraltar is right here, so when Spain gained control of both sides, it was in a commanding position to restrict any traffic passing in and out of the Western Mediterranean. Europe was also well placed for exploration across the Atlantic Ocean. Now finally, ships and navigation technology had seen some dramatic leaps forward. The most striking of these was the compass, which had originated in China around 200 BCE, and this allowed sailors to sail with much greater certainty than they were sailing in the right direction. Now, instruments such as the quadrant, the cross staff, and the astrolabe allowed them to calculate latitude by measuring the elevation of the sun and North Star. Now, although the rocking of the ships at sea often made measurements taken with these instruments highly inaccurate, Columbus, one of the best one of the best navigators of his day, took readings in the Caribbean that correspond to those of Wilmington, North Carolina, 1,100 miles to the north. And as a result of such imperfect measurements, sailing directions might be so vague as to read, sail south until your butter melts, then turn west. Now, compounding this with the lack of a way to measure longitude, the distance from east to west, until the 1700s, with the invention of the chronometer. So really, when these men were sailing on these ships west, when they left here and they went here, they had no idea they were even going in the right direction. They had no idea if they were going west and how long they were traveling. So I mean, when we talk about the bravery of these men that decided to set sail, that's something to think about. Now, maps also left a lot to be desired. A medieval map of the world showing Jerusalem in the center and paradise to the far east gives an insight into the medieval worldview, but little useful geographic information. By 1400, there were fairly decent coastal maps of Europe and the Mediterranean, known as portolan charts. However, these were of no use beyond Europe, and larger scale global projections would not come along until the 1500s. Now, advances in ship design involved a choice between Northern Atlantic and Southern Mediterranean styles. For hulls, shipwrights had a choice between the Mediterranean carvel design, where the planks were cut with saws and fit end to end, or northern clinker belt designs, where the planks were cut with an axe or adze and overlapped. Now, eventually, they put both of these together and formed very strong and large ships. The resulting ship, the carrack, was a fusion of northern and southern styles. It was carvel belt for greater size, but with a bulkier northern hull design to withstand rough seas. Now, living conditions aboard such ships, especially on long voyages, was appalling. Ships constantly leaked and were crawling with rats and lice and other creatures. They were also filthy, with little or no sanitation facilities. Without refrigeration, food and water spoiled quickly and horribly. Disease was rampant, especially scurvy, caused by a vitamin C deficiency. Now, a good voyage between Portugal and India would claim the lives of 20% of the crewmen from scurvy alone. Now, it should come as no surprise then that ships' crews were often drawn from the dregs of society and required a strong and awful brutal hand to keep them in line. Now, Portugal and Spain led the way in early exploration for two main reasons. First, they were the earliest European recipients of Arab math, astronomy, and geographic knowledge, based on the works of the 2nd century AD geographer Ptolemy. Second, their position on the southwest corner of Europe was excellent for exploring southward around Africa and westward towards South America. All right. Are there any questions so far about the factors that were favoring Europe and the new technology that was developed that kind of helped Europeans go forward? All right. So let's talk next about Portugal. Now, Portugal started serious explorations in the early 1400s, hoping to find both the legendary Prester John as an ally against the Muslims and the source of gold that the Arabs were getting from overland routes through the Sahara. Now, at first, they did not plan to sail around Africa, believing it connected with the great southern continent, as the Bible mentions. The guiding spirit for these voyages was Prince Henry the Navigator, whose headquarters at Sagres on the north coast of Africa attracted some of the best geographers, cartographers, and pilots of the day. Henry never went on any of his expeditions, but he was their heart and soul. The exploration of Africa offered several physical and psychological obstacles. For one thing, there were various superstitions, such as boiling seas as one approached the equator, monsters and Cape Bojador, which many thought was the gates of hell. Also, since the North Star, the sailor's main navigational guide, would disappear south of the equator, sailors were reluctant to cross that line. Therefore, early explorations would explore a few miles of the coast and then scurry back to Sagres. This slowed progress, especially around Cape Boador, where some 15 voyages turned back before one expedition in 1434 finally braved its passage without being swallowed up. In the 1440s, the Portuguese found some, but not enough gold, and started engaging in the slave trade, which would disrupt African cultures for centuries. In 1445, they reached the part of the African coast that turns eastward for a while, which raised hopes that they could circumnavigate Africa to reach India, a hope that remained even when they found the coast turning south again. So basically, they started up here in Sagres, and they moved down the coast little mile by mile with their superstitions. And as they got here to the tip and started going that way, they thought to themselves, we've made it. And then they bump into this western coast of Africa, and they have to continue sailing south. Now, the big breakthrough came when Bartholomew Dias was blown by a storm around the southern tip of Africa, which he called the Cape of Storms, but later called it the Cape of Good Hope. When Dias relocated the coast, it was to his west. So basically, he was blown offshore and landed over here. And he realized the coast is to my west, which meant he had rounded the tip of Africa. However, his men, frightened by the rumors of monsters in the waters ahead, forced him to turn back. So they got up here, and then they forced him to go back around Cape of Good Hope. Now, soon after this, the Spanish, afraid the Portuguese would claim the riches of the East for themselves, backed Columbus's voyages that discovered and claimed the Americas for Spain. Now, this in turn spurred Portuguese efforts to find a route to Asia before Spain did. However, Portugal's king died, and the transition to a new king meant it was 10 years before the Portuguese could send Vasco da Gama with 4 ships to sail to India. Swinging west to pick up westerly winds, da Gama rounded the Cape of Good Hope in 3 months, losing 1 ship in the process. Heading up the coast, the Portuguese encountered Arab surprise and hostility against European ships in their waters. Da Gama found an Indian pilot who led the Portuguese flotilla across the Indian Ocean to India in 1498. Now notice what I had mentioned here, that one of the reasons the Portuguese continued going was because of competition with Spain. Now, Spain led the other great outward thrust of exploration westward across the Atlantic. Like Portugal, the Spanish were also partially driven in their exploration by certain misconceptions. While they did realize the Earth is round, they also vastly underestimated its size and thought it was 7/8 land, making Asia much bigger and extending much further west. Therefore, they vastly underestimated the distance of a westward voyage to Asia. This was especially true of a Genoese captain by the name of Christopher Columbus, an experienced sailor who had seen most of the limits of European exploration up to that point in time, having sailed the waters from Iceland to the African coast. So he sailed up here to Iceland, which is located up in this area, Iceland, down the coast as well. Now, Columbus had the idea that the shortest route to the Spice Islands was sailing west, being only some 3,500 miles. In fact, the real distance is closer to 12,000 miles. Although South America is only about 3,500 miles west of Spain, explaining why Columbus thought he had hit Asia. Now, the problem was that most people believed such an open sea voyage was still too long for the ships of the day. Now, getting support for the scheme was not easy. The Portuguese were already committed to finding a route to India around Africa, and Spain was preoccupied with driving the Moors and Muslims from their last stronghold of Granada in southern Spain. However, when the Portuguese rounded the Cape of Good Hope and stood at the verge of reaching India, Spain had added incentive to find another route to Asia. Therefore, when Granada finally fell in 1492, Spain was able to commit itself to Columbus's claim. So once again, competition played a very important role. Now, Columbus set sail August 3rd, 1492, with two caravels, the Nina, the Pinta, and a carrack, the Santa Maria. They experienced perfect sailing weather and winds. In fact, the weather was too good for Columbus's sailors, who worried that the perfect winds blowing out would be against them going home, while the clear weather brought no rain to replenish water supplies. Now, Columbus even lied to his men about how far they were from home, although the figure he gave them was fairly accurate, since his own calculations overestimated how far they had gone. Now, by October 10th, nerves were on edge, and Columbus promised to turn back if land were not sighted in 2 or 3 days. Fortunately, on October the 12th, scouts spotted the island of San Salvador, which Columbus mistook for Japan. After failing to find the Japanese court, Columbus instead, After failing to find the Japanese court, Columbus concluded he had overshot Japan. Further exploration brought in a little gold and a few captives, but when the Santa Maria ran aground, Columbus decided to return home. A lucky miscalculation of his coordinates caused him to sail north, where he picked up the prevailing westerlies. The homeward voyage was a rough one, but Columbus reached Portugal in March of 1493, where he taunted the Portuguese with the claim that he had found a new route to the Spice Islands. This created more incentive for the Portuguese to circumnavigate Africa, which they did in 1498. Now, Ferdinand and Isabella, although disappointed by the immediate returns of the voyage, were excited by the prospects of controlling the Asian trade. They gave Columbus the title Admiral of the Ocean Sea, Viceroy, and Governor of the islands that he half discovered in the Indies. Over the next decade, they sent him on 3 more voyages to find the Spice Islands. Each successive voyage put even more of the Caribbean and surrounding coastline on the map, but the Spice Islands were never found. Columbus never admitted that his discovery was a new continent. He died in 1504, still convinced that he had reached Asia. Now, many other voyages continued. New ships were sent out to explore new regions, but while this was going on, the Spanish were busy exploring the Americas in search of new conquests, riches, and even the fountain of youth. There were 2 particularly spectacular conquests. The first was by Hernando Cortez, who led a small army of several hundred men against the Aztec Empire in Mexico. Despite their small number, the Spanish could exploit several advantages: the superior weapons and discipline, the myth of Quetzalcoatl, which foretold the return of a fair-haired and bearded god in 1519, the year Cortez did appear, and an outbreak of smallpox, which Native Americans had no prior contact to or resistance. Because of this and other Eurasian diseases, Native American populations would be devastated over the following centuries to possibly less than 10% of their numbers in 1500. The Spanish conquistador Pizarro, leading an army of less than 150 men, carried out an even more amazing conquest of the Inca Empire in Peru in the 1530s. Taking advantage of a dispute over the throne, Pizarro captured the Inca emperor, whose authority was so great that his capture virtually paralyzed the Incas into inaction. And as a result, a highly developed empire ruling millions of people fell to the handful of Spaniards. The conquest of Mexico and Peru more than compensated Spain for its failure to establish a trade route to the Spice Islands. The wealth of South America's gold and silver mines would provide Spain with the means to make it the great power of Europe in the 1500s. Unfortunately, Spain would squander these riches in a series of fruitless religious wars that would wreck its power by 1650. Now, other Spanish expeditions were exploring South America's coasts and rivers, in particular the Amazon, the Orinoco, and the Rio de la Plata, along with ventures into what is now southwest United States to find the 7 cities of gold, the Mississippi River, and Florida to find the fountain of youth. Now, while they found little gold, they did provide a reasonable outline of South America and parts of North America by 1550. However, no one had yet found an easy route to Asia. Therefore, the following centuries would see further explorations, which, while failing to find an easier passageway, would in the process piece together most of the global map. All right, so these are the voyages that brought people to the Americas. And right now, very quickly, we're going to watch a video. So what I want to know, while I show this video here, I want you guys to, I want someone to chime in that they can hear the video. So let me know if you can hear it. This is called History versus Christopher Columbus. It's a TED Ed. So we'll see if the volume is good here. I think I had set it up so that you'll hear the video. So if you don't hear the video, or if you hear the video, let me know that you hear it so that I will continue playing. If not, I'll put the link up for us to watch. So this is a TED Ed video on the History versus Christopher Columbus.
Many people in the United States and Latin America have grown up celebrating the anniversary of Christopher Columbus's voyage. But was he an intrepid explorer who brought two worlds together? Or a ruthless exploiter who brought colonialism and slavery? And did he even discover America at all? It's time to put Columbus on the stand in History versus Christopher Columbus.
Order in the court. Wait, am I even supposed to be at work today?
Yes, Your Honor. From 1792, Columbus Day was celebrated in many parts of the United States on October 12th, the actual anniversary date. But although it was declared an official holiday in 1934, individual states aren't required to observe it. Only 23 states close public services, and more states are moving away from it completely.
What a pity. In the 70s, we even moved it to the second Monday in October so people could get a nice 3-day weekend. But I guess you folks just hate celebrations. What are we celebrating again?
Come on, Your Honor. We all learned it in school. Christopher Columbus convinced the King of Spain to send him on a mission to find a better trade route to India. Not by going east over land, but sailing west around the globe. Everyone said it was crazy because they still thought the world was flat. But he knew better. And when in 1492 he sailed the ocean blue, he found something better than India, a whole new continent. What rubbish. First of all, educated people knew the world was round since Aristotle. Secondly, Columbus didn't discover anything. There were already people living here for millennia. And he wasn't even the first European to visit. The Norse had settled Newfoundland almost 500 years before.
You don't say. So how come we're not all wearing those cow helmets?
Actually, they didn't really wear those either. Who cares what some Vikings did way back when? Those settlements didn't last, but Columbus's did. And the news he brought back to Europe spread far and wide, inspiring all the explorers and settlers who came after. Without him, none of us would be here today. And because of him, millions of Native Americans aren't here today. Do you know what Columbus did in the colonies he founded? He took the very first natives he met prisoner and wrote in his journal about how easily he could conquer and enslave all of them.
Oh, come on. Everyone was fighting each other back then. Didn't the natives even tell Columbus about other tribes raiding and taking captives?
Yes, but tribal warfare was sporadic and limited. It certainly didn't wipe out 90% of the population.
Why is celebrating this Columbus so important to you anyway?
Your Honor, Columbus's voyage was an inspiration to struggling people all across Europe, symbolizing freedom and new beginnings. And his discovery gave our grandparents and great-grandparents the chance to come here and build better lives for their children. Don't we deserve a hero to remind everyone that our country was built on the struggles of immigrants? And what about the struggles of Native Americans who were nearly wiped out and forced into reservations, and whose descendants still suffer from poverty and discrimination? How can you make a hero out of a man who caused so much suffering?
That's history. You can't judge a guy in the 15th century by modern standards. People back then even thought spreading Christianity and civilization across the world was a moral duty.
Actually, he was pretty bad even by old standards. While governing Hispaniola, he tortured and mutilated natives who didn't bring him enough gold, and sold girls as young as 9 into sexual slavery. And he was brutal even to the other colonists he ruled, to the point that he was removed from power and thrown in jail. When the missionary Bartolomé de las Casas visited the island, he wrote, from 1494 to 1508, over 3 million people had perished from war, slavery, and the mines. Who in future generations will believe this? Well, I'm not sure I believe those numbers.
Say, aren't there other ways the holiday is celebrated?
In some Latin American countries, they celebrate the same date under different names, such as Dia de la Raza. In these places, it's more a celebration of the native and mixed cultures that survived through the colonial period. Some places in the U.S. have also renamed the holiday as Native American Day or Indigenous Peoples Day, and changed the celebrations accordingly.
So why not just change the name if it's such a problem?
Because it's tradition. Ordinary people need their heroes and their founding myths.
Can't we just keep celebrating the way we've been doing for a century without having to delve into all this serious research? It's not like anyone is actually celebrating genocide.
Traditions change, and the way we choose to keep them alive says a lot about our values.
Well, it looks like giving tired judges a day off isn't one of those values anyway.
Traditions and holidays are important to all cultures, but a hero in one era may become a villain in the next, as our historical knowledge expands and our values evolve. And deciding what these traditions should mean today is a major part of putting history on trial.
All right. So what did you guys think of the video? Anyone have any thoughts they'd like to share with the group here, with the small group that we have? What did you guys think of the idea that we have certain myths and legends that kind of create who we are as individuals? They said that, you know, regardless of how bad of a person he may have been, there are some good things that may have come about because of what Columbus did. Now, of course, Columbus didn't do it on purpose. It was an accident that he found the Americas. But can you guys think of any other, the three of you think of any other examples of myths? It is, I mean, I wouldn't say necessarily dumbed down. They just made it clearer for us to get it, Marion. Santa Claus, yeah, Santa Claus is definitely a myth, especially something we tell our children, which I hope no children that still believe in Santa are watching right now. But yeah, we kind of have these kind of mythological creatures or people, but Columbus was a real person. I mean, Santa Claus was based off of Saint Nicholas from hundreds of years ago, but we also have other group men that we talk about with lots of importance in American history, including our founding fathers, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, the people who wrote our Declaration of Independence and who helped form our nation. So we do have these kind of myths and stories that are brought down for us because they're often looked at as larger than life individuals we'll talk about later. But it's important to understand that these myths do create an identity, an American identity that follows us throughout time. And we often have trouble on letting go of these myths and these people. For example, very recently, Andrew Jackson is going to be removed in 2020. He's going to be removed from our $20 bill and replaced with Harriet Tubman. And this was looked at as a very important event because of the new history that we've discovered about Andrew Jackson and whether or not, which we'll talk about in this class, he was as democratic and as forward-thinking as we wanted, as we thought he was. These great founding fathers and these great men, these great leaders are now being removed from our money. A lot of people got really upset because of what's happening with that. So as you look through this course, try to avoid looking at what the story behind the person and the myth behind the person and the legend behind the person, legendary person, and try to really look at the history and the knowledge, the information that you can read from what they wrote about and the primary sources and those things as well. Now, one of the guys that was mentioned, one of the gentlemen that was mentioned in the video was Bartolome de las Casas. And looking here on page 54 of the text, which is in chapter 2 of the text, you can read an excerpt from Bartolome de las Casas and his views on Native Americans and how they were being treated by the Europeans. Now, once Europeans arrived, we get what's known as the Columbian Exchange, where we start to exchange not only plants and animals, but things like disease as well, and new ideas. And all those animals that were missing from the Americas from a couple of lectures ago, which I talked about, have now been brought in from Europe, and now Europe starts to dominate the Americas and kind of, as I mentioned in the lecture, reduce the size of Native American populations by 90%. There are still a lot around, but not as many as there would have been prior to Europeans arriving. All right, so this is all that we're going to be talking about today in today's lecture. We are not having a conference tomorrow. We have a day off tomorrow. I have some tests that I have a final exam for another course that I teach. So we don't have that going on. We will meet again on Friday. Hopefully we can get more classmates to join us on Friday. I know some people work Monday through Wednesday and have Thursday, Friday, the weekend off. So hopefully we can get a chance to meet each other and get more of them on there as well. So are there any questions that anyone has before I sign us out of here and end our discussion? All right. So if there are no questions, this is all that we're going to be doing today. Once again, thank you for participating and thank you for being here and asking some questions and letting me know how things are going. Again, try to talk it up, try to get people to join us, maybe send some emails or messages to each other online. And hopefully you guys can find the recordings of this. And I hope you guys have a wonderful evening. If you haven't eaten dinner yet, go enjoy your dinner, go do some studying, go do some reading, get caught up, and don't forget to do your assignments in and your discussion posts as well. So I want to have a wonderful night, and I will see you guys on Friday perhaps, all right? So good night, everyone.